Berlin. February 1943. The air inside the Oberkommando des Heeres was heavy with the scent of smoke and damp paper. Outside, the winter rain turned to sleet, striking the windows like a typewriter hammering through the night. Inside the war room, under the dim yellow lamps, a single folder lay open on the polished oak table. Its title, typed in sharp black letters, Allied Armored Development, North American Production Models. A courier had just arrived from Madrid, one of the most active nests of German espionage in neutral Europe. The report inside came from a trusted operative, one who claimed direct access to British shipping manifests and American supply chains. It was a promising file. To the men gathered around that table, it might have been the key to predicting the enemy's next move. The officers leaned in. General Heinz Guderian, recalled to the staff for consultation, spoke little, his eyes sharp behind round glasses. Across from him sat analysts from the Abwehr and the Waffenamt, flipping through pages filled with blueprints, numbers and performance data on a new tank reportedly mass-produced by the Americans, the M4 Sherman. According to the report, it was underpowered, thinly armored and mechanically fragile. It could not, the agent claimed, match the firepower or resilience of the German Panzer IV, let alone the formidable Tiger that had just made its debut on the Eastern Front. The Sherman, they said, was a machine for quantity not quality, built for transport not battle. In that moment the men around the table smiled. They believed they understood their enemy. That night, somewhere between the clinking of glasses and the scratch of pens on paper, Germany's high command began to underestimate the very machine that would, within 2 years, grind their armies into the mud. What no one in that room realized was that the information was wrong. Deliberately wrong. The agent who sent it had been turned months before, one of many caught in the silent web of British counterintelligence known as the double-cross system. The data on the M4 Sherman was a fabrication, designed to lull the German war machine into a false sense of security. But that story, of deceit, arrogance and illusion, did not unfold in a single night. It began in the fog of war where truth itself became a weapon. And tonight, we uncover how the Reich, blinded by its own pride, was fed lies that cost it everything. This is the untold story of the spies who sabotaged Germany from within, not with bombs or bullets but with paper and ink. If you value deep historical truth told without sensationalism, subscribe and stay with us. History remembers the victors, but we tell the stories of those who believed they could never lose. The world of 1943 was one of shadows. Across Europe, the front lines stretched from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen rivers of Russia. Armies clashed in open battle, but behind those battlefields, an invisible war was being fought, a war of messages, codes and invisible hands guiding the flow of information. For Germany, intelligence was power. Or at least it was supposed to be. By 1943, the German intelligence network was vast. From Lisbon to Stockholm, from Istanbul to Buenos Aires, agents gathered whispers, intercepted cables, and bribed dockworkers, engineers, and diplomats. Yet as the network grew, so did the noise. And in the noise, truth began to drown. In London, the British had discovered something extraordinary. Through a mix of luck, skill, and a relentless bureaucracy, MI5 had built one of the most effective counterespionage programs in history. Every known German agent in Britain, every single one, had been captured or turned. Not most of them. All of them. To the Germans, this was unthinkable. They believed that at least some of their spies were active, feeding valuable intelligence home. But the truth was darker. Every report, every cable, every confirmed piece of information from British soil was carefully crafted by MI5. The British were not just reading the enemy's mail, they were writing it. Among these messages was a steady stream of reports about Allied weapons, particularly tanks. The Germans had long feared industrial warfare, the idea that the Allies could simply outproduce them. So British intelligence learned to feed their fear just enough to keep them confident. When reports of the American M4 Sherman began to reach Berlin, they were precisely engineered to sound plausible. The numbers were believable. The tone was professional. And the flaws, slight enough to confirm the German worldview that their machines, though fewer, were superior. It was the perfect psychological trap. The men in Berlin read about the Sherman's so-called thin armor, only 2 inches at its thickest. They read about its small-caliber gun, a mere 75 millimeters, ineffective against German heavy armor at range. They noted its supposed mechanical unreliability and tendency to catch fire when hit. The report concluded with a subtle reassurance. This tank will not alter the balance of power on the battlefield. That single line would echo through every German tank division for months to come. What the Germans did not know was that the Sherman's armor, though not as thick, was sloped, deflecting shells that would have penetrated flat steel. Its gun, while modest, could fire faster and more accurately under battlefield conditions. Its reliability meant it could move, fight, and be repaired in hours while German tanks sat broken for days. And above all, it was everywhere. While the Germans built thousands, the Allies built tens of thousands. The numbers were not just statistics, they were destiny. But in 1943, destiny was still hidden beneath the fog of arrogance. Within the Abwehr, dissenting voices did exist. Some officers questioned the accuracy of the intelligence, pointing to captured Shermans in North Africa that performed better than expected. Yet their warnings were dismissed. The reports from Madrid and Lisbon were confirmed by multiple sources. The illusion of corroboration made the lie seem true. And so, in staff meetings, on maps and strategy memos, the M4 Sherman became a symbol, not of Allied strength but of German superiority. It was the tank that reassured the Reich. For Hitler, that illusion was comforting. The Führer's fascination with superweapons, his belief that quality would overcome quantity, was already a cornerstone of his military philosophy. When he was told the Americans had chosen mass over mastery, he felt validated. It was a validation that would doom him. As the tide of war turned, the Germans continued to misjudge Allied armor. Even in 1944, when reports from Normandy told of swarms of Shermans overrunning positions, Berlin dismissed them as exaggerated. Propaganda, one general called it. No machine that weak could perform so well. But the machine had one weapon the Germans could not quantify: numbers driven by will. The M4 Sherman was not built to be perfect. It was built to be enough. And in modern war, enough was everything. Back in Berlin, as the rain turned to snow that February night, the men of the High Command filed out of the room. The folder on the Sherman was stamped, classified, and sent to archives. Another report, another illusion safely stored away. They did not know that, thousands of miles away, British intelligence officers smiled at their success. The deception had worked. Germany would plan its armored strategy around a myth. History would remember this as one of the quietest yet most devastating victories of the war. Because sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't a bomb or a bullet. It's a lie told to the right man at the right time. And the cost of believing that lie would echo all the way to the ruins of Berlin. In the deserts of Tunisia, the myth of the Sherman was about to be tested. By early 1943, the Afrika Korps was in retreat. Rommel's once dazzling campaigns had collapsed under the weight of Allied air power, supply shortages, and a relentless tide of new American forces landing along the North African coast. Among those forces rolled hundreds of M4 Shermans, their olive-drab hulls cutting across the sand like an advancing tide. To German tank crews they seemed ordinary, boxes on tracks, noisy and unimpressive. Intelligence had told them these machines were inferior. And on paper they were. But war, as the desert would prove, is rarely fought on paper. When the Shermans first entered combat near Kasserine Pass, German commanders noted something unsettling. They did not break down. They did not stall in the heat. They kept coming. For every one destroyed, another two appeared. The Americans, inexperienced but determined, pushed forward through chaos, their Shermans maneuvering faster than expected, firing quicker than the panzers that had once dominated the sands. Reports from the front began to conflict with the intelligence sent from Europe. Tank crews described how Allied formations recovered from losses in hours, not days. Mechanics repaired Shermans under fire, using spare parts scavenged from wrecks. The German logistical miracle of 1941 was now being matched and outpaced. But in Berlin, these reports were quietly filtered, rewritten, and softened. The High Command dismissed them as temporary successes of numerical superiority. The arrogance of design, of believing in the invincibility of German engineering, blinded them to the truth unfolding before their eyes. In the Reich's war rooms, the numbers meant nothing. In the desert, they meant everything. The Sherman's most dangerous feature wasn't its armor or its gun, it was its consistency. Every unit, from Tunisia to Sicily, operated the same way. Crews could climb into any Sherman, anywhere in the world, and fight as if it were their own. The Germans, with their complex and unique models, the Panzer IV, the Panther, the Tiger, required custom parts, specialized crews and constant maintenance. A Tiger tank was a masterpiece of engineering, but it was a diva on the battlefield. A Sherman was not elegant. It was inevitable. Rommel saw it before anyone else. In one of his final reports from North Africa, he warned that the Americans had solved the problem of mobility, and that their tanks recovered with a speed that made previous tactical assumptions obsolete. But in Berlin, Rommel's reputation was fading. His words were considered defeatist. The intelligence files said otherwise. The Sherman was still inferior. And so the illusion held. When the Allies invaded Sicily in the summer of 1943, the German High Command believed their tanks would crush the landing forces as they had in France 3 years before. Instead, they found themselves overwhelmed. Shermans rolled off landing craft, advanced inland, and fought through towns that had once seemed impregnable. At first, German reports focused on terrain and logistics. The rocky roads, the collapsing Italian lines, the lack of supplies. No one wanted to admit that the Allies' armor, this inferior machine, was holding its own against German steel. By autumn, even as Italy surrendered, German officers continued to underestimate what they faced. The false data from the turned spies had done its work. Berlin believed the Americans had not improved their tank designs. They were still producing the same weak, easy-to-kill machines described in those early reports. But Allied factories were already producing upgraded Shermans with thicker armor, better guns, and new tactics to match. The Germans didn't see it. They couldn't see it. Their intelligence system had built a world that confirmed their pride, and their pride demanded to be believed. Behind this deception, British intelligence watched quietly. Each time a German spy requested new data, MI5 delivered it with surgical precision, just plausible enough to sustain the illusion. To the Abwehr, the information seemed consistent, supported by multiple sources across Spain, Switzerland, and Portugal. In reality, those sources were all part of the same web. Every thread led back to London. By 1944, that web was nearly unbreakable. The British no longer needed to lie outright, they simply guided what the Germans already wanted to believe. It was the most dangerous form of deception, confirmation. And confirmation had a seductive power. In Berlin, the reports painted a clear picture. The Sherman was numerous but flawed. The German Panther and Tiger tanks were superior in every measurable way. On paper, the Reich's armored divisions still ruled the battlefield. The numbers said so. The agents said so. The Führer said so. But the battlefield said otherwise. In the shattered villages of southern Italy, German crews began to experience a new kind of warfare, one of exhaustion. Shermans advanced with relentless rhythm, their crews rotating, their supplies endless. German tanks, by contrast, broke down, ran out of fuel, or were destroyed faster than they could be replaced. Commanders began to abandon their vehicles and retreat under cover of night. By the winter of 1943, the myth of mechanical superiority was bleeding out in the mud. Yet back in Berlin, propaganda turned every loss into a tactical withdrawal. The officers who dared question the intelligence were reassigned, silenced, or ignored. It was not just arrogance, it was inertia. A system too proud to admit that it had been deceived. Meanwhile, in Allied command rooms in London and Washington, analysts studied captured German reports with a mixture of awe and disbelief. They could see how deeply the deception had sunk in. "They still think the Sherman is weak," one British officer wrote. "They will pay for it in blood." And pay they did. In early 1944, as the Allies prepared for the invasion of Europe, the M4 Sherman had become more than a machine. It was a doctrine. Fast to build, fast to repair, fast to move. A tank not of perfection but of persistence. German analysts, still trapped in their old assumptions, failed to grasp the scale of what was coming. They believed they faced another North Africa. A limited front, manageable numbers, slow reinforcements. The intelligence said so. But behind those assumptions lay an ocean of steel, over 50,000 Shermans waiting to flood across Europe. In Berlin, the deception had become doctrine. The spies who once whispered lies had long since faded into the noise of bureaucracy. Their falsehoods had hardened into truth. And that truth guided every strategic decision Germany made in the final years of the war. When D-Day came, the illusion would finally collapse. But by then it would be too late. In London, the officers of MI5 and the XX Committee, the architects of the Double Cross, watched the buildup of Operation Overlord with quiet confidence. They had spent years perfecting the art of misinformation, feeding the Germans exactly what they needed to hear. They had already fooled them about troop movements, invasion dates, and now they had shaped their belief about the very tools of war. In the end, Germany was not defeated by Allied technology alone, nor by numbers, nor by raw industrial power. It was defeated by belief, by the conviction that their intelligence was infallible, that their machines were superior, that their understanding of war could not be challenged. That belief, sustained by spies they trusted, would cost them an empire. By 1944, the war had entered its second life, a world of shadows behind the noise of battle. The guns spoke in Europe, but the real war was fought in whispers, in letters that never reached their true destination, and in agents who no longer knew which side they served. At the center of this silent conflict was a committee, an unremarkable office in London with a simple name, the XX Committee. The Double Cross. Its mission was not to gather intelligence but to sculpt it, to create a world that the enemy would believe in. Under their direction, every German agent operating in Britain, without exception, was now under British control. Some were captured and flipped. Others never existed at all, creations of the British imagination, complete with fake personalities, coded letters, and elaborate backstories. They sent reports, received payments from Berlin, and exchanged invisible secrets about Allied operations. Among those secrets were the technical evaluations of Allied tanks. The Germans were obsessed with these reports. They believed that knowing their enemy's machinery would give them the upper hand on the battlefield. The Abwehr demanded regular updates on the American Sherman's capabilities. The British were more than happy to oblige. Through their network of double agents, they began to send a carefully curated stream of misinformation, consistent, subtle, believable. The Sherman was common but clumsy. It was serviceable yet tactically limited. Its armor, insufficient against German 88mm guns. And its crews young, inexperienced, often untrained. The lie was not outrageous. It was reasonable. And that made it lethal. In Berlin, the reports aligned perfectly with what German generals already believed. They confirmed Hitler's conviction that the war would be decided not by numbers, but by technology, by the superiority of German craftsmanship. To him, the Tiger and Panther were not just tanks, they were symbols of German genius. Machines that embodied destiny. When the British learned how deeply the Führer believed in the myth of the superweapon, they stopped fighting it. They fed it. Every spy's report was shaped to reinforce his vision of German dominance. In London, the deception became almost an art form. The agents codenamed Garbo, Tricycle, and Bronx, men and women whose entire lives had become performances, wrote long, convincing letters to their handlers in the Reich. They described how the Allies were building thousands of Shermans, yes, but mostly for transportation, not combat. One report, supposedly from a dockside informant, detailed how these tanks were being shipped in large numbers because of their unreliability. Another claimed that the Americans used them as armored buses for infantry rather than true battle tanks. The tone was technical, unemotional, exactly what a real spy would send. Berlin ate it up. The Abwehr's analysts, surrounded by paper, charts, and cables, saw the same pattern repeating. Dozens of agents in different countries all reporting the same thing. It could not possibly be a lie, they thought. The coincidences were too perfect. And so, they built their strategies on that illusion. In early 1944, as Hitler's generals prepared for the inevitable Allied invasion of Western Europe, they faced a strategic question: how to counter the vast armored forces expected to land on the continent. Intelligence from their agents, those same voices controlled by the British, suggested that the Allies' tank formations were numerous but technically weak. The Sherman was still vulnerable, easily penetrated, mechanically fragile. That information shaped everything, from the positioning of German armor in France to the types of anti-tank weapons prioritized in production. Even the development of new tank destroyers like the Jag Panther and Jag Tiger was justified by these same flawed assumptions. The Germans built monsters to fight phantoms. Every ton of steel poured into these massive machines was a victory for British intelligence. The more the Reich doubled down on its illusions, the weaker it became. Meanwhile, in England, the Allies were preparing for D-Day. In quiet coastal towns, Shermans were being modified for the invasion, fitted with deep wading gear, flails, and even amphibious DD skirts to make them float across the channel. To the Germans, these innovations were invisible. Their spies never mentioned them. Their intelligence reports never hinted at them. When Operation Overlord began on June 6, 1944, the German generals were caught between disbelief and confusion. Their defenses had been built in the wrong places. Their armor was positioned miles inland, expecting an attack at Calais, not Normandy. And when the Shermans came, hundreds of them rolling off the beaches like a living tide, the Germans still believed they were weak. The 1st Panther divisions moved to counterattack. They advanced through hedgerows, expecting to slaughter the thin-skinned American tanks with ease. But the battle did not go as planned. The Shermans, supported by air cover and mobile artillery, fought back with coordination the Germans had never faced before. The battlefield was chaos. Smoke, fire, steel. At close range, the Shermans' quick-firing 75mm guns found their mark. Some were destroyed, yes, but more replaced them within hours. The German counterattack failed. For the men inside the tanks, the difference was not in steel or firepower. It was in rhythm. The Shermans kept coming. On the German side, confusion turned to disbelief. Reports from the front contradicted everything intelligence had promised. The enemy's tanks were not collapsing. They were advancing. But by the time those reports reached Berlin, the damage was done. The illusion had become policy. Hitler refused to believe his commanders. He blamed local failures, cowardice, or the weather. The spies, he said, could not all be wrong. But they were. Every single one. In London, the XX committee monitored the chaos with quiet precision. They intercepted the panicked messages sent from German headquarters, noting how their lies had shaped the enemy's expectations. They had created not just misinformation, but momentum. The Germans were now reacting to a war that didn't exist. And it was killing them. As the Allies pushed through Normandy, the Panther and Tiger divisions were too slow, too few, too fragile to stem the tide. Their steel masterpieces broke down on narrow French roads, abandoned for lack of fuel. Sherman swarmed around them like insects, hitting, withdrawing, repairing, and returning before the Germans could reload. One German commander, writing in his field diary, described it as fighting against water. Every blow he struck only disappeared into the flood. By July, as the Allies broke out of Normandy, Berlin still clung to the reports from their agents. Even as cities burned, they believed. The British had succeeded not just in deceiving the German command, but in shaping the psychology of their entire military apparatus. For years, German engineers had been told they were the best in the world. Their machines were miracles of precision and design. And they were, but in war, perfection is fragile. It bends under pressure, breaks under mass. The Sherman, ugly and utilitarian, was never meant to be admired. It was meant to be used. The Germans could not comprehend this. Their culture of perfection made them blind to pragmatism. Their spies had not lied to them about the Sherman. They had told them what they already wanted to hear. And that is how empires die. Not with an explosion, but with a nod of agreement to a comfortable lie. In the ruins of Normandy, as columns of Shermans rolled toward Paris, the myth finally began to crumble. Field reports flooded Berlin, urgent, desperate, contradictory. Officers warned that Allied tanks were far more capable than expected. That they were not weak. That they were not temporary. That they were unstoppable. By then, the truth was no longer useful. The Reich had already built its plans around falsehoods. Its industries, its armies, its faith. To change course now would be to admit failure, and arrogance does not yield to truth. So the machine kept running even as it tore itself apart. By the autumn of 1944, the illusion was collapsing under its own weight. What began as a carefully crafted deception had turned into a cancer spreading through every level of German command. The Abwehr, the once feared intelligence arm of the Reich, was no longer feared by anyone. Its networks had been penetrated, its agents compromised, its credibility bleeding away like oil from a broken engine. The first cracks appeared quietly. In August, British and American forces liberated Paris. German intelligence had predicted the Allies would need months to reach the city. They were wrong. Then reports surfaced that captured Shermans were not the crude, thin-skinned vehicles the agents had described, but formidable machines with upgraded armor, improved guns, and radio systems that allowed unprecedented coordination. When these findings reached Berlin, disbelief turned into panic. Hitler demanded to know why his intelligence services had failed him. The answer, of course, was buried beneath years of arrogance. The Abwehr blamed the frontline commanders for misinterpreting data. The frontline commanders blamed the Abwehr for feeding propaganda. And somewhere in London, behind locked doors, the officers of MI5 watched as their greatest illusion devoured itself. In the archives of the XX Committee, one document stands out. Dated September 1944, it records a simple phrase spoken by one of the committee's analysts after reviewing a captured German dispatch. They are still believing it. Even as their armies collapsed on two fronts, the Germans still believed their spies were working. But their spies were gone. Most had been captured years earlier. Some were executed, others quietly turned, and a few, like the legendary double agent Garbo, had built entire fictional networks of subagents who never existed. For 3 years, Berlin had paid salaries, sent medals, and issued commendations to ghosts. Every time a report arrived, another illusion took root. When the Allies landed in southern France, the Germans were caught off guard again. Intelligence had assured them that the invasion in Normandy was merely a diversion, and that the main Allied strike would come at Calais. That lie too had been written in London. The weight of deception was finally unbearable. By late 1944, as Allied tanks, many of them Shermans, rolled through Belgium and into the German borderlands, the once proud intelligence network of the Reich had become a parody of itself. Messages from the field contradicted one another. Some claimed that Shermans were invincible, others insisted they were burning by the dozens. The confusion was total. Inside the crumbling offices of the OKH, the high command turned on itself. Generals shouted across maps littered with red arrows, each representing another Allied advance. "Our intelligence is worthless," one shouted. "We have been blind." No one disagreed. The Abwehr's reputation was finished. Admiral Canaris, its head, had long fallen out of favor with Hitler. Accused of treason and incompetence, he was arrested, tortured, and executed in April 1945. By then the damage was irreversible. What remained of the German intelligence apparatus was absorbed by the SS and the RSHA, the Reich Main Security Office, led by fanatics who preferred ideology to analysis. They did not seek truth. They sought reassurance. And reassurance was the one thing they could always find. In January 1945, as the Red Army crossed the Vistula and Allied bombers reduced German cities to ashes, reports still circulated in Berlin insisting that the Sherman was technically inferior. The phrase appeared like a mantra, repeated so often it became meaningless. Even as columns of Shermans drove through the snow toward the Rhine, the paper war continued, pages of falsified data, graphs of armor thickness, ammunition types, firepower comparisons, all detached from the reality outside. Reality by then was on fire. In the ruins of Aachen, German tank crews faced the truth up close. The Sherman's gun might not have been the most powerful, but it was always there, always firing, always advancing. The Germans no longer fought against machines, they fought against an endless production line, against factories that never slept, against a will that refused to break. For the soldiers on the ground, the myth of the weak Sherman had become a death sentence. In one captured letter from a German tank commander to his wife, found after the war, he wrote, "We were told they would be easy to destroy. We were told they burn like paper. But they keep coming. Every time we knock one down, 5 more appear. We fight and we die and still they come." That was the moment when belief turned to despair. Back in Berlin, the war room grew quieter. The confident chatter of 1943 was gone. The folders on Allied equipment were no longer discussed. They were ignored. Even the mention of the Sherman drew nervous glances. The myth had turned into a ghost that haunted them. Yet even in its dying days, the Reich clung to its illusions. In February 1945, an SS report still claimed that Allied tanks suffer catastrophic mechanical failure after extended operation. It was absurd. There were now thousands of Shermans operating inside Germany itself. But the machine that once produced lies could not stop. It was too late for truth. When the British Army entered the city of Hanover, they discovered abandoned German tanks with empty fuel lines and missing tracks, machines that had been worshipped as symbols of superiority. Nearby, Shermans rolled past, their engines steady, their armor scarred but unbroken. The contrast was poetic. The superweapon versus the standard issue. The myth of perfection versus the reality of endurance. The dream of dominance versus the truth of defeat. In April, as Allied forces closed in on Berlin, the final remnants of the Abwehr archives were burned. Decades of intelligence, real and imagined, turned to smoke. Somewhere in those flames were the false reports that had once convinced an empire that it could not lose. And as those ashes rose into the night sky, so did the last illusion of the Third Reich. In the end, no Allied agent needed to plant a bomb in Hitler's bunker. The lie had already done it. The German intelligence machine, once a symbol of precision and efficiency, had collapsed under the simplest weapon of all, confidence. Their spies did not destroy them. Their arrogance did. The Sherman, that inferior tank, had become the instrument of truth. Not because it was perfect but because it was real. It existed in numbers, in motion, in persistence. The Reich had believed in a fantasy of engineering brilliance. The Allies had believed in the power of production, of logistics, of collective strength. One built icons. The other built results. And when the dust finally settled, it was the results that rolled through the ruins of Europe. In May 1945, Berlin fell. The Tiger and the Panther, once symbols of invincibility, sat silent in the rubble, too complex to repair, too few to matter. The Shermans moved through the wreckage, their tracks crushing what was left of the empire that had mocked them. For the men who had once sat in that Berlin war room 2 years earlier, studying their falsified reports under the yellow lamps, the circle was complete. They had believed a lie because it was beautiful. And beauty in war is a dangerous thing. In the spring of 1945, the war was over long before Berlin fell. The shells still fell. The soldiers still fought. But the outcome had already been written, etched not on the battlefield but in the reports that had shaped how those battles were fought. Inside the Führer bunker, the once mighty nerve center of the Reich was reduced to a tomb of paper. Crumpled maps, burned orders, and torn files lay scattered across the concrete floor. Among them were the final intelligence reports from the Abwehr, ghosts of a system that no longer existed. They spoke of divisions that had been annihilated, of tanks that had never arrived, of a world that had ceased to obey its own illusions. Hitler still clung to them. Even in his final days as artillery thundered over Berlin, he raged at the idea that his invincible machines had failed him. He could not understand how the Allies had achieved such dominance, how the Shermans had crossed rivers, mountains, and bombed out cities faster than his best designs could retreat. He blamed betrayal. He blamed weakness. He never blamed belief. Yet belief was the true enemy. The deception that had begun in 1943 with a few falsified reports had metastasized into an empire of misinformation. It wasn't just about the Sherman, it was about a mindset. The German command believed in what it wanted to be true, that intelligence was infallible, that precision engineering guaranteed victory, that ideology could bend reality to its will. The Allies had simply let them believe it. When the war ended, British and American investigators combed through captured German archives. They found the falsified reports, the double-agent communications, and the endless technical analyses built on lies. In one file, dated March 1944, a German analyst had written, "The American tank, while numerous, is tactically insignificant." On the same page, someone had underlined the phrase and added in red pencil, "We now know this to be false." That red line was more than a correction. It was an epitaph. In the months that followed, Allied interrogators questioned surviving officers from the Abwehr. Many insisted they had simply followed the data. Some confessed they had suspected manipulation but lacked proof. A few admitted what the others would not, that the real reason they believed the lies was pride. "Every report confirmed what we wanted to believe," one former analyst said years later. "And so we stopped asking if it was true." That, perhaps, is the most dangerous truth of all. The story of the false Sherman reports was not about one tank or one spy or even one war. It was about the human tendency to confuse confidence with knowledge, to mistake arrogance for strength. For the British, the deception had been a masterstroke. The XX Committee's work remained classified for decades. When it was finally revealed, historians described it as one of the greatest strategic manipulations in history. They called it an invisible victory. A war won not with armies but with assumptions. And in those assumptions lay the future of warfare. The lessons of the double cross reverberated long after 1945. In the Cold War that followed, both East and West built entire intelligence empires designed to control information, to shape perception, to make the enemy believe what was convenient. Truth became just another weapon, one that could be twisted, diluted, or drowned beneath the noise. It was not the last time arrogance would disguise itself as certainty. For every generation the illusion takes a new form. A weapon believed to be unstoppable, a system thought to be perfect, a nation convinced of its superiority. And every time reality eventually catches up. It always does. The Germans in 1943 believed that their spies had given them the truth. They believed that their machines were unmatched, their intelligence unshakable, their destiny inevitable. But history does not serve destiny, it serves consequence. And the consequence of believing a lie, when you have the power to question it, is destruction. In the years after the war, surviving Shermans were shipped home, sold, or scrapped. Thousands were melted down, their steel reborn into cars, bridges, and tools. The Tiger tanks, once feared, were left to rust in fields, their hulks monuments to futility. But in museums across the world, one can still find the M4 Sherman, painted, restored, silent. Tourists walk around it, read the plaques, take photographs. They call it the tank that won the war. But the truth is more subtle. The Sherman didn't win because it was invincible. It won because it existed, in numbers, in time, in persistence. It was a machine built for reality. And reality, in the end, is what destroyed the Reich. For every shell that struck Berlin, there was an idea behind it, a small correction to a lie once believed. Every bridge crossed by Allied armor was another myth undone. Every surrender, every silence, every burnt file in the Abwehr's archives was a reminder that power built on arrogance cannot survive the truth. History is full of these moments. Empires fall not only because they are defeated, but because they refuse to believe they can be. The German spies who sent those false reports never knew how far their words would reach. Some did it to survive. Others truly believed they were serving their country. A few may have realized in their final moments that their lies had become the foundation of their nation's downfall. But by then the truth no longer mattered. When the guns fell silent in May 1945, Europe was a graveyard of illusions. The myth of invincibility, the faith in technology, the trust in information, all of it lay in ruins beside the cities that once believed themselves eternal. And in those ruins stood the M4 Sherman, scarred, dirty, ordinary, its engine humming softly in the fading light. A symbol not of perfection but of endurance. Not of genius but of honesty. Not of arrogance but of adaptation. Its armor bore the marks of truth, the kind that doesn't shine, doesn't boast, doesn't promise invincibility but simply survives. In the end, that was what Germany never understood. That power is not the same as strength and precision is not the same as wisdom. The war they lost was not just against armies, it was against themselves. The lie that began in a single report, typed in some back room in Madrid, ended with cities burned, millions dead, and an empire erased from the map. And somewhere in the silence after the last shell fell, history whispered its lesson once more. The greatest enemy of intelligence is certainty. The loudest echo of war is pride. And the deadliest weapon ever used was belief.